Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for this most important event. I'd like to say thank you in particular to Her Excellency Ambassador Babyn of Ukraine for giving of her time, especially under such circumstances when the Ukraine is in such crisis. Thank you. Our hearts and prayers are with you all. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Rob.
Thank you, Rabbi, and a warm welcome to our panelists, especially a warm welcome to Her Excellency Ambassador Babyn, and I echo the Rabbi's words. Ambassador, thank you so very, very much for giving us of your time. We really, really appreciate it. Special welcome to our panelists for this, what promises to be a very, very special event indeed. Just also to our viewers, and especially this for our viewers for our first time, our shows are always, you are always part of our shows, and to that extent, we welcome Q&A and comments. Just a special appeal, and that is to the extent that there are Q&A or comments, please can I ask that you send them in as soon as you have them and not wait to the end. It just helps us quite a lot with scheduling, and there's much more of a probability that your questions or comments can be aired and asked to our panelists. So what we're going to have is we're going to have our panelists talking about the activities that they do. That is going to be preceded by Ambassador Babyn's message. So once those the presentations are given, we will then open it up to the floor for the live Q&A. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Tali Nates from the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zolberg. Thank you very much, Robert Katz, Ambassador Babyn, our partners at the base, our guest speakers, Ruslan Kavatsiuk, Helise Lieberman, and Jakub Nowakowski, the dear Holocaust survivors that are joining us today, our friends from South Africa and from around the world. It is a great honor to have this partnership event again tonight. It is an important event. You all agree with us that in the past month, our hearts, our minds are in this topic of war and worry and heartbreak. And together, the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and the base decided that we have to put together an event that will discuss these issues and will empower us to know more about what is going on the ground. We partner with the base for many years now, almost 2 years now, and this event feels more important than ever. It is gratifying to be joined by colleagues and friends in Poland and Ukraine that I must say agreed immediately to join. Within few days, we put this event together because all of us realized how important it is to come together and speak about these issues. Being on the advisory board of the Eastern European Holocaust Studies Journal of the Babyn Holocaust Memorial makes it very special for me to have Ruslan here with us, speaking about what is happening on the ground in Babyn. We all know that memorials to the Holocaust, and when history of the Holocaust itself is under attack, both physically and verbally, we cannot stand still or stand by and not say anything. So we do have to speak about those issues as they happen. The claimed neutrality of the South African government is in fact a position, in my opinion, of being a bystander. We at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center teach that the bystander always assists the perpetrator, never the victim, by standing by and not getting involved. Primo Levi, the Auschwitz survivor and famous writer, said about Germany and Germans during the Holocaust, in spite of the varied possibilities for information, most Germans didn't know because they didn't want to know, because indeed they wanted not to know. And we want you to know. So tonight's panel will give us information about the situation on the ground, both in Ukraine, but also in the neighboring countries. And we will concentrate today on Poland and the activities with Ukrainian refugees in that country. After that, we who listen will not be able to say that we wanted not to know. We will know more, and I hope that we will do more. We will also share with you in the chat links to more information and ways to support and assist if you wish to do so, and I do hope that you will want to do so even in a small way. Please consider to get involved. And thank you for posting the link in the chat. We will also send that link to you. Tonight, I asked our ambassador in South Africa, ambassador of the Ukraine in South Africa, Her Excellency Lyubov Abravitova, to say a few words and open the discussion, and I will introduce her in a minute. I also asked our three panelists to reflect on the question, what did you do until the 24th of February in your museums or centers, and what changed on that day for you and for your work in museums or memorials in Poland or Ukraine? I asked them to reflect on how their centers or places of learning dedicated to the Holocaust or Jewish life or memory or education turned their focus to action and to answer the immediate needs on the ground. Finally, museums and memorials became spaces of memory activism. They encourage all around them, or still encouraging all around them, for active citizenship. And those spaces need to encourage all of us to look at lessons about choices that we can live with, where we all strive to being upstanders and not bystanders. To start, I will invite Ambassador of the Ukraine in South Africa and Southern Africa, Her Excellency Lyubov Abravitova, to address us in her opening remarks, and then I will introduce our three panelists. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Tali. Dear Rabbi and dear friends of Ukraine, friends of truth, and friends of freedom. It is a big honor and maybe responsibility for me today to talk to you and to open this very important event. I want to greet especially Ruslan. I never met him before, and I'm glad he is participating in this event. I'm sure the panelists, though I'm not a panelist today, the panel will be very important and interesting. You know, first of all, thank you for hosting and organizing this event and calling the war a war. Today, the institutions like Center of Holocaust in Johannesburg and somewhere else is having the new meaning, a new dimension. We must tell that I was not initially invited for this event because Tali anticipated that most probably I would be very busy with some other things, and she is absolutely right that it's not the easiest time today for the Embassy of Ukraine anywhere in the world. But it is very important to speak about the truth, about what is happening today, and about what we can do together to never repeat and never allow what is happening now again. Yesterday we were working with Ms. Stalinates and some other staff members of the Holocaust Center through the center. And you know, it was completely different feeling from that I had a couple of months ago when we were making the next exhibition about Babyn Yar. Tali, I think it was somewhere in September or October last year. It was completely different feeling. It was like you are living through this again, but already in 2022. So we know that the military invasion of Russian Federation in Ukraine is a really full-scale war. And every day, every hour, every minute, this war brings losses and brings a lot of sorrow. For Russia, a state criminal, a state terrorist, human lives is nothing. And nothing as it was during the Nazis' Germany. That is why the progressive world understands now how important today is to support those who are fighting not just for their land, for their sovereignty and freedom, but for the human values, and basically for the whole humanity. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to all institutions such as the Centers of Holocaust all over the world for their solidarity with Ukraine, for your solidarity with Ukraine. And I'm sure that the sad story, the sad history that the world is witnessing now will make us stronger and will never allow us to repeat and to allow to repeat this to anyone again. With all my heart, I appreciate all the panelists who dedicated their time today to talk. And I'm with you always. Let's wish our panelists today a very interesting, productive discussion. And I'm sure that at the end of it, we will come up with interesting ideas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your words and for gracing us with your presence in these very, very difficult and challenging times. It is now my honor to present our panelists for this evening. We will start with Ruslan Kavatsiuk, the Deputy CEO for Science and Education at the Babyn Holocaust Memorial Center in Kiev. That will be followed by Jakub Nowakowski, the director of the Galicia Jewish Museum in Krakow. And finally, by Helise Lieberman, the director of the Taube Center for Jewish Life and Learning, joining us from Warsaw, Poland. And we will follow that with a discussion and question. Ruslan, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share with you some of experience that we're going through right now in Ukraine. I most probably expect that many of you haven't been to Ukraine, and some of you might have. And I will tell you honestly that if you have been to any other country of Central Eastern Europe, like Poland or Latvia or Romania, Bulgaria, you would understand that Ukraine is not very much different. Kyiv is just like Warsaw, just like Bucharest or Budapest. It's a democratic country of 40 million people, and by territory a little bit larger than France. And yet our democratic country was attacked full scale by Russia Federation. You know the capacity of Russian Federation, their Soviet built nuclear powers, etc. And of course it is unprecedented type of attack for modern history, with authoritarian state attacking a democratic country in Europe. I myself work as Deputy CEO of Babyn Holocaust Memorial Center since end of 2019. And over the last 2.5 years, we have managed to transform this place of the biggest mass grave of the Second World War from the place of basically oblivion, which Soviet Union tried to erase the memory about Babyn Yar and the Jews that were killed there, and into a place of memory about 2.5 million Eastern European Jews who were killed, not in concentration camps, but next to their homes in the day, broad light, shot dead in pitches and ravines around their villages, towns, and cities like Kyiv. And in Babyn Yar is the biggest of these graves and the symbol of all of these graves. This summer was the plan to open first museum space in Babyn Yar that would tell the story of the first and biggest mass shooting in Babyn Yar and in Holocaust. It was 34,000 Kyiv Jews that mainly were women and children and elderly that were killed in this ravine during the 2 days of end of September 1941. Unfortunately, due to invasion and attack in Kyiv, we have now had to suspend our plans to open that museum space. And we still expect that after our armed forces will protect our country, we will return to this plan and building this museum. We understand that our enemy did not expect that Ukrainian armed forces will be so strong protecting our country. And it's important that our people as well in the east and in the south of Ukraine met the invaders in massive demonstration of their support for Ukraine and not support of the Russian forces. We all understand that it is a tremendous sacrifice that is happening right now. It is clear that Russians cannot win this war military way against armed forces of Ukraine, and now they attack civilians. Like in my hometown, right next to Kyiv, in suburbs of Kyiv, in Hostomel, Russians have killed many civilians, and there are videos of my neighbors in the social media chat that we share with each other, where civilians were killed and killed in their cars, where only women were in the cars with children trying to leave the place of occupation. So this is very hard to justify, this kind of war that Russia is waging against Ukraine and Ukrainian people. And it does look right now more and more terrible. In Mariupol, if you see these mass graves with thousands of people in one mass grave, this is something that didn't happen for quite a long time in Europe. Frankly speaking, cities of Ukraine were bombarded this way only the last time in the Second World War. And right now, Russia is repeating that. And they are repeating it under false historical, so to say, narrative, with saying that Ukrainians are some kind of Nazis and Russians are some kind of liberators of the free world and free people, which is completely judged by all Holocaust institutions, this misleading and false narrative that Russian president is using, and that he's supported by 73% of Russian population with this war and these terrible war crimes that they're committing against civilians. And it is, again, important to understand that Russians do try to erase, not only conquer our country, but also erase our culture and our people and our identity as Ukrainians. They also attack Ukrainian Jews and Jewish sites. They attacked Babyn Yar. They attacked in Kharkiv, Drobytsky Yar, the menorah was destroyed partially. Now they say in the first days, they've attacked Uman. And now they say that in Uman, in synagogues, there are some nationalists. And that is not the case, that something is happening there, because Jewish community of Uman is saying that there are no one in those synagogues. There are no one, and it's important to understand that because Russians are preparing to attack again. And that is something that is highly important to understand, because I understand that South Africa is very far from Ukraine, very far. And it's clear that such events that happen far away are difficult to understand, but it is important to share this and important to share with you what is happening.
Thank you very much, Ruslan, and I'm sure that there are many, many more questions for you. Kuba, will you join us now?
Thank you, Tali, Your Excellency, rabbis, friends. I mean, this is really a great pleasure and honor to be to spend this evening with you. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, Your Excellency, Ruslan, I mean, please do accept those simple words. I mean, we're very, very terribly sorry of what is happening. We are all with you in Poland, and I think none of us really could believe that this is really happening until it happened. I think we all been hoping that this will end like it ended in always. I mean, over the last years, that it's, you know, it will never be true, that the worst scenario will not happen, and yet it happened. yes, I mean, early 2022, we at the Galicia Jewish Museum in Poland, we've been slowly recovering from the COVID situation for the last 2 years. All of us been struggling to survive the pandemic, striving to find new ways of acting in those pandemic times. And I think in January, February, we've been all hopeful that the worst things already are in the past. In Galicia Jewish Museum in 2019, we had 70,000 visitors. In 2021, this number dropped to 16,000. So early January, February, we've been already looking at the ways, the programs that can bring more people in. We were expecting, we were hoping for a very busy, very good spring and summer. We've been talking with Tali, with our Israeli friends, with our American friends about the groups that were supposed to come, the programs that we were supposed to do, our Ukrainian guests that we would invite for conferences that together with Helise and Ruslan Gruber we were organizing for the summer. So we were hoping for a normal life, and things change for us very much. And of course, Poland is much closer than South Africa to Ukraine. Lviv is 4 hours drive from where I'm sitting in Krakow, but yet it's of course a different world. I mean, whatever the problems, whatever the challenges we are facing here in Poland, this is only a shock wave. We can't really imagine how difficult, how horrible it is to be right now in Ukraine. But for us at the Galicia Jewish Museum, things got real very quickly. It was already before the war when in Poland we have seen a quite significant influx of the Ukrainians coming in to work. And so it was also at the Galicia Jewish Museum since 2021, we had 4 employees from Ukraine. And when the war broke out, on the first day, we've seen that this is real. I mean, that this is not only a news feed on our phone or computer, but we've seen crying people, we've seen tears, we've seen emotions of our Ukrainian colleagues who had their families back in Ukraine. And actually, one of our colleagues, a young man, young boy, gave me a notice on the day, a couple of hours after the war broke out. He came to my office and say, Kuba, I'm really sorry, but I need to go back to Ukraine. And we're in touch. He's fighting against the Russians. For us, that was already, taking this entire situation to a very personal level. So because of those connections, because of those friends, the colleagues that we were having at the Galicia Jewish Museum, we've decided, I mean, it was natural that we need to help them. We need to start helping their families. So at the museum, we started to do whatever we can right away, whether it was collecting medicines, food, supplies, because of those people, because of those connections in Ukraine, because those colleagues of ours, some of them are still having families in Ukraine. We've been able to send those products, send those supplies directly to the people in need. But then, of course, we started to see the refugees, the huge numbers of refugees coming in through the border, and I think it was for us. I don't know if it's, I mean, what made us, but it became natural. It became obvious that we need to start helping. I mean, there is nothing we can do more than opening our doors to those people that are in need. So I think what happened in Poland, what is still happening, that many of those refugees were actually taken in by individuals. This was also the case in my family, in our home, right after the war broke out, and that was also something that shocked us and made us personally very much was the first Ukrainian family that we taken in. They came to Krakow from Ukraine in the middle of the night. We got a call that there was a family that looks for shelter. It was actually a Belarusian Uber driver that brought them for free. I mean, he was there to help. And they came, and it was 4 o'clock in the morning. There was 2 women and 2 kids. 7 and 5, which is exactly the age of my kids. I have two boys, they are 7 and 5, and there could be nothing that would be more shocking than seeing those boys, those mothers, in the middle of the night, just terrified, lost, traumatized. They had no idea, they didn't know what's going on. And I think this kind of experience make you involved. So for us, we've been taking in families and trying to help. And soon enough, we realized that, taking in those people is only a first step, because when they are with us for a couple of days, when the people who've been here, we've realized that those people are lost, are traumatized, are in a darkness, and we need to be caring also for them. And that kind of was the moment when we realized that precisely because the number of visitors to the museum is still very much lower than in 2019, we have still this unused space. We have these conference rooms, education spaces that were not used anymore that often. And seeing those kids that have been spending time at my place in our home, kind of doing just nothing, seeing the mothers that wanted to start finding documents, calling and so on, we realized that maybe at the Galicia Jewish Museum what we can do is actually to utilize this space that we have, and to offer some kind of activities for children. So soon enough we've decided, and actually it was a roller coaster ride, because we've decided that we want to open a daycare center on Thursday. We've also decided that we want this daycare to be run by Ukrainian refugees themselves. So on Friday, we found two teachers, both of them refugees who escaped from Ukraine. And on Monday, the daycare was open. And since then, we've been bringing in kids. They comes from all of Ukraine. As our teacher Valentina said and wrote, I mean, they come from very, very different backgrounds. Some of them comes from cities, and some of them comes from villages. Some of them had beautiful houses, and some of them were living in a village. All of them miss their brothers. All of them miss their fathers who are fighting. All of them miss their homes. And I mean that this is something that we've been that became one of our key elements of our work for our Ukrainian neighbors, for our Ukrainian friends, to provide places and space for the children, for the families, to offer them activities, to offer them safe space where they can just be kids. All the work in this daycare is being done by Ukrainian refugees. So on top of those two full-time teachers, we also been hiring other people to do singing classes, dancing classes, Polish language, English language, all sorts of different activities. So we try to help the kids, but also we want to try to help the refugees, because they all need to stand on their legs. Even if only for a couple of weeks, they'll need to be here. And I think giving them opportunity to start earning money, to do the job is equally important. And soon enough, we've started to hire people in other places of the museum, again, to give them some kind of stability, to show that they can kind of stop being a refugee and became an expert in whatever the field they've been just 5 weeks ago. And I think this is something that we try to do. And obviously, for us it's complicated, because it's the number of refugees to Poland is increasingly. I think the number for today, as of today, 2.3 million people crossed the border to Poland in 5 weeks. And in Kraków only, the town of approximately 900,000 inhabitants, it is estimated that the number of refugees reached 150,000 people. So the needs are great. The needs are vast. But yes, I mean, that's something that Tali mentioned at the very beginning. I mean, as a Holocaust educators, as a museum that teaches about the past, one of the things that we've been always trying to say that the thing that we've been teaching about is about the danger of being indifferent about the danger to, as Tali quoted Primo Levi, to look the other way. So for us, there was no other way. There was no other thing that just try to do whatever we can to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kuba. And I have many questions for you, but let's invite Helise Lieberman to the floor to tell us what is happening in Warsaw and what is happening at the Taube Center. Helise, the floor is yours.
I'm very honored to be here. I'm feeling very humbled by the ambassador's comments and by my new, I hope, new colleague, Ruslan. We haven't met yet. I'm sorry, it's a war that brings us together, but we have much in common. And to all of you who've made this program possible, I really thank you. And again, I'm humbled. I'm sitting far away from the epicenter. I'm far from the border. And yet, in a sense, the Taube Center found itself on the 24th of February, which is just 1 month ago, suddenly in a space that it never anticipated. And as you've all said, maybe we did see it coming, but I don't think any of us, and this is what we've said about many, could have imagined the atrocities and the human price that this horrifying invasion would incur. And there was never a question about what we would do. We are, like Babyn has its mission, the Galicia Jewish Museum has its mission, the JCC of Warsaw has its mission, the Hillel Center has its mission. We said, we came together without even, there was a call to action, but it was almost a silent call. We need to get together, we need to work together, and we need to ask of each of us, what are our strengths so that our response can be appropriate, effective, and whatever quick. We quickly joined the Warsaw Jewish community, created a crisis management team, and pulling together all of the organizations, Jewish organizations in Warsaw, quickly put together a group of people who were transportation, accommodation, anything that needed an immediate response was put on the board, and people were delegated to respond as quickly as possible. And what we came in with was, this is not, and I don't mean to use such a trait, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. This is something that will evolve in human terms over many, many years. And while our acute response is what it is, and we're working with international organizations and our partners like the Galicia Jewish Museum and those in Warsaw and around the country, we need also to plan for what happens in the midterm and what happens in the long term. And what does temporary mean? I mean, it suddenly throws into light many of the values that we've all been teaching. Our primary mission is to connect the past and the present, the personal with the communal, the Jewish particular narrative with the global narrative through Jewish heritage study tours, through educational programs and our publications. And all of that remains true, but our mission is not limited. It's not confined by the tour, and it's not confined by the publications. But what we extracted from that was, I think, one, passion. I have never, ever witnessed so many compassionate individuals, NGOs, small communities, which as Kuba said, are sometimes, I mean, there are more refugees or more needs than they can even handle. And I think for all of us, and I hope that, Ruslan, you can share this, that people are giving of everything, their home, their hearts, because they feel that we are upstanders. We are not going to stand by. And this is, in this terrifying situation, heartening. And I think it gives all of us, and I hope those of us in Ukraine who are fighting the fight on the front. We're behind the lines. And there's a fight that we're helping to win here. My involvement started, if I may, when the war broke out, I was in Boston. And you can tell by my accent, I suppose, I'm American and Polish. And all I wanted to do was come home. I felt a need to be home in Poland, which was the first inkling for me of a sense of belonging and an understanding of what displacement, not voluntary displacement, I had voluntarily displaced myself, but what enforced displacement might mean. And the second was I got a call very late, as soon as I'd come home, from our general manager, who said, I'm at the border. I've rented a van from one of our subcontractors that we use for our tours. I have 20 people. I have enough money to give them food, and I'm bringing them to Warsaw. Will you confirm? There was no question. And those questions kept coming. And he kept going back and forth to the border. And he's one of many. So what we do, like the Galicia Jewish Museum, we said, what can we give? We have a space which we share with Hillel, and we created a day center. 12 women were sitting around the table the other day learning Polish. And they were doing so with a smile, because for a moment, they were getting something positive, support, and some key that they may need for whatever life they choose or have to live here in Poland. We are also supporting a center at the JCC, thinking of children's programs that don't need language, music, drama, creative arts. We're working to bring much needed goods to places that are not near the major cities, that have little access. We discovered an orphanage with 1,200 children. And we were asked, can you fund? We need to repaint. The paint is lead. We've got the space. We need the paint. So it's, you look at a can of paint and you think, that's all I'm giving, but yet this can of paint may make others have a life. And so I'm telling this like a jigsaw puzzle, because I really think it is a jigsaw puzzle. Pieces keep popping up, and then you try with partners and with people who have the legal knowledge, and people who are dealing with trauma, and people who are educators, and people who are translators, to put a puzzle together that gives a sense of a safe haven. We are lucky. Our mailing list has been generous and continues to be, to help us fund different kinds of actions and responses. And we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to work with our partners. And I want to just return to one piece, if I may, given the context of our conversation. For many, many decades, the Jews of Poland were on the receiving end of relief. And now, and we don't exclusively help Jewish refugees, but we are now the responsible ones to give relief. So there's a transformation which we as a community need to live up to. And that includes how we educate from here on in, how we memorialize, how do we incorporate, how do we integrate, how do we challenge narratives, how do we make the world open up beyond the headlines and beyond those big letters at the top of your internet feed. Because what we are seeing is that there is evil and there is good. And we would like all to be in a place that we do good.
Wonderful, wonderful, Helise, absolutely. We would start, Rob, to ask our panelists some questions and invite the audience to put your questions and reflections in the Q&A. Rob, maybe you will start.
Thank you. Ruslan, the first question I have is for you. You quite rightly make reference to the fact that we as South Africans are far away. We're a world away on the southern tip of Africa over here. But can you describe for us a day in the life in Kiev? What actually is happening on the ground? Do kids still go to school? Are people comfortable walking to shopping centers? Do people go out for dinner? Because, you know, the images that we get, you know, it seems like a murderous bombardment. You know, and it seems like I think it is a human tragedy unfolding right in the third decade of the 21st century here. But practically speaking, in your words and your experience, I think it will be very rich for our audience to hear from you a day in the life.
Well, as I said, I live near Kyiv, and I go back and forth to the city and back for work. My hometown, the suburb, is Hostomel. It was occupied from almost very first days of the war. And I've learned yesterday evening that my house was blown up and burned down, and with everything we own and with the car and everything. And so we don't, I'm not based in Kyiv at the moment. I moved to West Ukraine, to the hometown where I grew up, to my parents. And basically I travel to Poland and across the border to Kyiv, to bringing some additional equipment and protection for the armed forces. I was in Kyiv a couple of days ago. The last time there was completely clean city, no one on the streets. It was forbidden to go that day on the streets. So you would go through the roads of the city that is 4 million people, and it was completely empty, not a single car, not a single person, except for militaries on the block posts. And when we tried to upload from one truck to another some equipment for another brigade, the helmets and some medicine, and there was kind of a drunken guy coming up to us in completely empty city, across the the road with 6 sections, and he would behave as if he was drunk, but then the officer noticed him, and they took him, and he was not homeless, drunken person as he tried to behave. You could see that he's dirty, but there was a homeless guy living in our downstairs, our office, and I know how a homeless person looks like, their skin, their nails. And it was completely clear that this was, even for me, that this guy was a spy, and he would hold his phone like in his hand, bowing his head, but with a camera pointed on us. And it was clear that he was and there are many like this situations. Later that day, I would go for a car because we left the microbus for the brigade in Kyiv, so that they could transport different stuff. And we brought that microbus from Poland. And we had to go back with another car. So we picked it up, and there was shelling on the nearby street, and it killed 4 people. I'm sorry, it hit 4 people, 3 were wounded, 1 was dead. And so when we left that place, we went for the military hospital and picked up wounded soldiers. They're twice as young as I am, and twice my age, and they were all, you know, wounded, some of them without legs. And we transported them to west of Ukraine to another hospitals because the hospital was overcrowded. That was the day, and the last time I was in Kyiv a couple of days ago.
Thank you, Ruslan. Haunting testimony, haunting. Please God, you and your family will be safe. Ruslan, just one final question from me to you, and then I'm going to hand back to Tali. The work that you're doing at the Babyn Memorial, are you allowed to, or allowed is the wrong word, are you capable, are you practically able to carry on that work? Is the site being maintained? Is the site being able to be maintained? Is it safe?
Well, yes, we have continued. We moved all of our employees out of Kyiv, most of them basically. We kept the security on the site and some of our employees. Some of men in our team are now serving in armed forces, were conscripted. Mainly women and children were moved across to west of Ukraine, to safer area, or to some of them or to Poland, to safe havens like the two you just heard from Jakub and Helise. And we basically have moved all of our collection and our archives from Kyiv to west of Ukraine. And the historians continue their research. Two of the historians were from Kharkiv and their houses were blown up like mine. And now one of them is in Germany, the other in west of Ukraine. They continue their research. And we continue research on the names of the victims. And we have established a humanitarian project to help Righteous Among the Nations Holocaust survivors, evacuate some of them, and some of them help them with the medicine, with food, with water. And in Kyiv, in the area next to Babyn, we've established a program to help the disabled people, some elderly people who cannot move. So 2,000 people are receiving help from the foundation. And yes, and many of our team are just volunteering in their spare time, like I do. Like you can drive the whole night from west of Ukraine to Kyiv and then back. While that drive, you could join Zoom calls or something like that, and it's now new normal, and we try to continue most of our work, and the core team still works. Some of the teams and the suppliers we basically suspended the works with the construction of the museum and other things that are now are not safe to do. But yes, and after the attack on the Babyn territory, it was our security of the foundation of the memorial that tackled the guy who was correcting the fire, because it was local collaborator who was correcting the fire of the missile. And the missile was very precise, it was not a mistake. So they hit with the first missile, there was a 1 meter precise rocket that hit the middle of the tower, the TV tower, and the other went into Avant-Garde Center. It's an old Soviet building that was in our plans to be created a Holocaust memorial in Eastern Europe, and they hit it. And they hit it with the corrector who was standing on top of the installation for the names of the victims. And he was arrested after.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruslan. Thank you very, very much. Tali?
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Ruslan. I have so many other questions for you, but maybe Kuba and Helise, if I can bring you in. We hear that as you talk about the numbers, the sheer numbers of refugees, which are men, women, which are older men, the elderly, but mainly women and children in Poland. Where are those refugees housed? We heard, for example, about synagogues and even about the yeshiva of Chochmei Lublin in Lublin that are used for refugees. Can you talk to us a little bit about that sheer number and how different communities are using buildings to help with that?
Well, if I could jump in, Jakub, Just speaking from Warsaw and the Warsaw Jewish community, we've used several sites that belong to the community. One of them is the Yeshiva, which is in Lublin, which is obviously world famous for many as one of it's the birthplace of Daf Yomi, but it's owned by the Jewish community. It's a hotel. And it was quickly converted into, I call them safe havens, but perhaps shelter is an equally good word. And we've used other spaces in Kazimierz Dolny. We have a summer space that's been used by Jews of Warsaw even before the war, that's become a safe haven. Hotels have been rented. Basically, the Jewish community, with the help of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and HIAS, and also Jaffe, have also been renting hotels and making sure there's a concentration of people so that services can be delivered, to one place and as many people can be served as possible. So, and they're renting out apartments, Airbnbs, small hotels, pensionats in the region. I'm sure this is happening all over the country, in addition to people who've opened up their homes. And that, I think, is the initial response. But as Kuba mentioned, and we know well, we need to find a more solid temporary response. And then, of course, a more permanent solution. But I do want to address, Tali, and thank you for bringing up the Foundation for the Preservation of Jewish Heritage in Poland, a partner of ours and of the Galicia Jewish Museum, has several synagogues, pre-war synagogues that have been renovated. And Piotr Puchte said, a synagogue is a house of gathering and it should gather people who need it. So these synagogues are now available. Other communities, other NGOs, I know several NGOs who have been given office space, old office space by, corporations. They give the space, they help renovate it, and they're opening up hostels and hoteleries so that every available space that can be used for living with good sanitary conditions, an open space and a kitchen so people can cook and be. Those are the spaces that we're currently using. Kuba, Krakow?
All of what Helise has said is absolutely true. On top of that, we've seen that there were also NGOs and charity organizations that would rent out former offices or shopping galleries. In Krakow, there are shopping malls which were turned into sleeping quarters. There are office buildings that obviously because of COVID has moved people to work from their homes, and those office buildings are again used to house people. Again, in the city of 800,000 or 900,000, we have at this point 150,000 new residents, new incomers. This is a huge number. So pretty much everywhere, every available space is being used at this point to house the refugees from Ukraine.
You're all doing absolutely amazing work, from opening your own homes to opening community centers. And this is fantastic. Maybe one more question before, Rob, you can share some of the questions in the chat. For all of you, and Ruslan, maybe we start with you. The war is a war on a country, on the people, but it also seems to be a war on history from the sides of the Russians, from this blame of genocide to the blame of saying that they denazify Ukraine, which is absolutely ridiculous, and the attack on history, attack on archives, attacks on the burning of archives, attacks on memorials, and I just also saw that our very good friend, of course, involved also in the Babyn Memorial, Father Patrick Debois and his organization Yachad in Unum, said that he is going to collect testimonies and look at war crimes, but also collect testimonies. And I just wondered if you can reflect about this issue of the attack on history and collecting of testimonies and its importance, and specifically because the three of you are such experts on how do you preserve the memory of the Holocaust. So if you can reflect on that, maybe Ruslan, if you can start with your thoughts, and then we will move to Helise in Cuba.
Well, the second museum building, already with the architecture solution that we plan to build in Babyn Yar, is a museum of the history of oblivion of the tragedy of Babyn Yar and Holocaust. Because Soviet Union did incredible work trying to erase the history of Holocaust. There was no such word permitted. Even on the monuments for the victims, there was never word Jews used, never any identity of this nation. And only when Ukraine gained independence, it was first menorah established in Babyn Yar in 1991. And now we understand again, having to deal with the same KGB system led by officers of the same school that oppressed people like Natan Sharansky, who is the head of our supervisory board. And he's arrested on his way to Babyn Yar to commemorate victims there. And he stayed jail by KGB for 9 years. And we understand that it's the same system. It's the same system that is trying to erase Ukraine and erase Ukrainians as a nation. President of Russian Federation says Ukrainians do not exist. He says that the country like this does not exist. The language like this does not exist. The people like this does not exist. So it's important to erase our cultural heritage. So they hit museums, they hit places of memory. And we understand that this is not just a war. It's a war to destruct the country and the people of this country.
Can you just share your thoughts about Father Dubois and the testimonies just briefly?
Yes, Father Patrick has announced, and he is the head of our academic council as well. And he, together with Yahat Inunum and with the assistance of Babyn Yar Memorial, will be collecting testimonies about war crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine, and the testimonies of these witnesses and victims. And it's an important initiative since we understand that the horrible war crimes are being committed and Russians are expecting to be not held accountable for them.
Absolutely. We all know how important those testimonies are. Yes?
I would only add one thing. It is very similar to what happened with shooters in Babyn Yar and other places. The members of Einsatzgruppen that were never put to jail, never held accountable. They all returned to Germany. They lived long, prosperous lives because they got a lot of belongings of the victims. And they lived good lives, being bank managers, being legal advisors, etc. And they were just nice grandfathers who would, say the stories how they fought communists in the East, not about how they shot everyday women and children. And that is something that we understand Russians are also expecting to have, that all these jet fighters, all these bombers, they will go back, artillery guys, they will fly to France, to Italy for their vacation. They will eat nice food. They will travel to South Africa. Nobody will know their identity. And it's important that now Karim Khan announced it and German prosecution's office announced it, that they will now proceed holding them accountable. The middle guys, the guys who execute the orders, because they know what they do when they shell children.
Helise?
Take a breath. I would add here that in the name of the museum, oblivion is all true, and sorry, lost for words, not for thoughts, but for words. In the last decades, since Poland has been, like Ukraine, independent, the whole idea of what is history and whose history and how is it ours and how is it shared, what are the narratives, those conversations were just coming to the surface. Galicia Jewish Museum is a center of those conversations. Our tours bring out those conversations between memory and memorialization. Is it my family? Is it my people? Is it my country? And I think that all of these issues, we were making, I would say, Ruslan and Jakub, some progress. We were bringing things out. We were talking about things that were not talked about, things that were not discussed, even people's identities that were really hush, hush. And the war in Ukraine brings out how tenuous our relationship is with those memorials and what they stand for, and the archives and what they mean. And we know that people are more important, but we understand that those links with history are important as well, and that we too have this obligation to take care of them as much as we can and to be able to share them in the future.
Kuba, anything to add?
Well, I don't think there is anything to add to what Ruslan and Helise just mentioned. I mean, it's especially what Ruslan mentioned about the narration in Russia. I mean, this is from our point of view very much like an Orwell reality situation. When they know it's not true, we know that they know that it's not true. But yet they still telling those lies. And the most horrible things is that as it was pointed out, significant amount of Russians, of everyday inhabitants, who do believe more or less what is being told. So I think this horrible situation that we're witnessing today in Ukraine is again, once again, is reminding us where does lack of the democratic values, lack of freedom, lack of diversity, where does it end? This is where it ends.
And I think, Kuba, I'm just thinking about the way you grew up in Kazimierz, in Krakow, not knowing the past of that area, and that is also because of the communist sort of narrative. And I wonder if you can just very briefly just connect it to your own personal experience as a Polish boy growing up in a Jewish neighborhood without knowing that it had a Jewish past.
Well, yes. I mean, this is precisely what Ruslan also mentioned. I mean, the paradox of Eastern Europe was that for centuries this was a center of a Jewish world. I mean, at the end of 18th century, this part of the borderland between Poland and Ukraine is at the end of 18th century, where 75% of all the Jews of the world lives. Then, from being a center of Jewish life, this part of the world became an epicenter of Jewish death, with millions of people killed in places like Babyn or Auschwitz. Most of the victims of the Holocaust are killed precisely here. And then, instead of commemoration, instead of remembrance, we have oblivion. We have lack of discussion. If one would, people are having a hard time to believe that it really was not being discussed. It would not be something we would be acknowledged as an important thing to be discussing. So one again, I mean, wonder whether looking forward, this can happen again. I mean, whether this fake narration can prevail. We will need to be discovering the real story again. That is hopefully not something will happen. But this certainly has happened and was possible, and it's still happening in Russia. I mean, precisely those. This is the governments are choosing what can be discussed, how can be discussed, and what are the subjects that are to disappear.
Thank you. It's actually chilling to hear you say that. Ambassador Abravitova, you wanted to also reflect a little bit about this very important question. And I think you are muted. Ambassador? Maybe the Zoom link was dropped. She wanted to come in and add. We will, of course, allow her when she rejoined to add. Rob, maybe pose one or two of the questions, and then we will come back to the ambassador.
Fine. So the first question we have is a statement, and then a question which is going to follow, and posing to the panelists. The Economist published a poll displaying a disturbing poll that indicated a large difference of views in Russia and blame for the war in the under 30 years of age population in the US. The under 30s were much more sympathetic to Russia. The question is, how does the panel think that this can be reversed? Not sure who's best suited to answer that.
I think that's the whole question that we understand from current new media, social media communication, and how easily disinformation penetrates it, how easily misinformation creates emotional links that prevail information and education, and how our education systems should actually try to change and find a way to be relevant and emotionally relevant. That is why, as we plan the memorial in Babyn Yar, we plan it as not only historical accurate, but also emotional journey of the visitors through the territory. Because emotion is critical when you understand some, not just numbers of 2.5 million, but you understand one child, 7 years old, that was killed in this place. And that is a tragedy of a personal experience that you must go. That's why with the names of the victims, they are not written on our memorial. They are pronounced 24/7 on the installation dedicated to names of the victims. And they're pronounced by child voices, the children's names, by women's voices, the women's names. And thus, many young people just come and sit there in the warm weather for hours and listen to those names. And that's something that we understand, that we found a language to speak to our younger audience, because we understand that the main audience of our memorial is the future generations.
Thank you, Ruslan. Very powerful indeed. Just a comment I'd like to just read out, which I think is relevant, and then a question, and then perhaps tell back to you for the ambassador. A comment from one of our viewers. I think that the truth of authoritarian societies is more troubling than the cliches about authoritarian regimes. Placing responsibility on Putin is easier than trying to share out the responsibility across an entire society and understand it. Okay, comment. Another question, and that is, why would Russia want to destroy historic sites and museums where they were not responsible for war crimes? Ruslan, perhaps you'd be best suited to answer that.
Sorry, I have a bad connection for the last 10 seconds. Can you repeat the last question? Because the first one I heard.
The question is, why would Russia want to destroy these war memorials and museums when they themselves were not responsible for the initial war crimes?
Well, it's very important to understand the context of the beginning of the Second World War, which was started together by Nazi Germany and Soviet Union by attacking Poland on the grounds that it's a country that doesn't have to exist, that has no right to exist, that Polish people should not be separate nation, and so on and so forth. And they divided this country. And then that led to announcement of the war by France and Great Britain. And we also must understand that for the first 2 years of the war, 1939 and 1940 and half of 1941, basically Germany and Soviet Union are together in this war on the one side. And they are allies, basically. Then Germany attacks Soviet Union. So in Soviet times, when you would hear about the Second World War, you would never hear about the first 2 years. You would always know that the Second World War for Soviet Union started in 1941. And that was the day celebrated. And it was said that untruthful Germany attacked Soviet Union. It was a hit in the back because they had a pact of Molotov and Ribbentrop. And then, of course, what was designed as a history of Soviet Union was to erase all the nationalities, to create only Soviet people, no Jews, no Ukrainians, no one. That's why they would forbid for Jews, for instance, to have their own identity, and for Ukrainians as well. So you would have the country that would try to erase people. And Russia, unfortunately, still remains the empire that tries to erase identities of the people that live inside of this country. If you look at their minorities, their rights to study their own languages, for instance, in Tatarstan, the Tatars, or in other parts of Russia, they must only speak the Russian language. They do not have rights for national freedoms and education and their language. And they are gradually erased and merged into some kind of a new nation inside of Russia. That's the internal narrative of the empire, and that's behind the attack on Ukraine as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruslan. Before I close and pass on to Tali, Tal, the ambassador wanted to say something, but she has a problem. Can I pass over to you?
Yes, of course. Sadly, the situation in South Africa is that we have some electricity issues. And suddenly, her electricity in Pretoria was dropped. She is in darkness, and she apologized. She really, really wanted to add to the conversation, but she cannot join us. She is without electricity. So apologies about that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tal. So in closing from my side, I'd just like to read out a comment from one of our viewers, which I'm sure is reflective over the entire viewer base here. Thank you for this informative and eye-opening program. My heartfelt wishes for your personal safety and for that of all the people of Ukraine. And from myself, before I pass over to Tali for her closing remarks, to Her Excellency the Ambassador in her absence, to our very, very special panelists who so generously have given their time and spirit, a sincere thank you from all of us here on the program. You should be blessed. You should all know from safety and security to you, to your families, and to the entire people of Ukraine. And please know that there are a heap load of peace-loving people in South Africa who are 100% behind you, support you, and salute you in your endeavors. God bless. Tal?
Rob, you really could not say it better. And I also add my thanks to the ambassador, to Ruslan, to Helise, to Kuba for really generously sharing your time with us and your expertise. I want to thank everyone that came today, and to remind you again to please read, support, if you can, even a small amount, gain knowledge, know what is going on the ground. We are far away in South Africa, but we should be knowledgeable about the situation, and of course, beyond Ukraine, our world is a wounded world. There's no doubt that Ukraine-Russia is not the only crisis that we are sadly facing. We have many, many crises in our own country, with refugees and xenophobia, in our continent and in the world. But really our heart is at this point and tonight with the people of Ukraine. And just maybe final thank you to our friends in Poland that are doing the work, friends of years that we work together in the Holocaust memory and education sphere, are now doing the work, which I am very, very grateful to. And with that, I will pass to Rabbi Aaron Zolberg to close today's webinar.
Thank you, Tali. Just to reiterate, I'd like to thank all the panelists for this evening and for giving of their time. Thank you to Her Excellency Ambassador Abravitova of Ukraine to South Africa, Ruslan Kavatsiuk, Deputy Director of Babyn Holocaust Memorial Center, Helise Lieberman, Director of the Taube Center for Jewish Life and Learning Foundation, and Jakub Nowakowski, Director of the Galicia Jewish Museum. Thank you, Robertal Katz, for all that he does, not only this evening, but for our community in general. And to you, Tali Nates, and your whole team, to say thank you for this evening really does not do enough justice for all that you do. And we really thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we appreciate our partnership. Thank you, Moshe and John Omotek, for the expertise behind and organizing and hosting of this event. To conclude, though, to echo Tali in her introduction, the partnership of the base and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center goes back quite a while now. But this topic, in many respects, is perhaps the most important event we have participated in together. This is happening now. Ukraine may be far geographically, but I believe I speak on behalf of our communities when I say we are with you, and we pray for the end of this war and hope for peace soon. Thank you all for joining. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a good evening.